I never would have anticipated we'd be here. In fact, I'm not sure I would have started this podcast.
It was such an important conversation that we published it twice. The next challenge often becomes how to make good choices under real-world constraints.
Two simple words that totally changed both how I feel and how I'm perceived.
My name is Doreen and I am 5. I wanted to say hello to you all.
Welcome to the 100th episode of the Storytelling with Data podcast, where listeners around the world are to be better storytellers and presenters. We'll cover a wide range of topics that will help you effectively show and tell your data stories. So get ready to separate yourself from the mess of 3D exploding pie charts and deliver knockout presentations. And with that, here's Cole.
Hi, Cole here. Welcome to this super special episode of the Storytelling with Data podcast. Episode number 100. I never would have anticipated we'd be here. In fact, I'm not sure I would have started this podcast if it weren't for my husband, Randy. I joke that he wanted me to start it so he'd have a reason to get fancy tech, microphones, headphones, and the like. But the truth is that he's been a consumer of information in audio form for much longer than I have. His early insistence that the podcast would be a good idea was all about how people like to learn and consume information in different ways. Couple that encouragement with a situation I encountered after running an informal Remake This Graph challenge on the Storytelling with Data blog and subsequently getting a response from the head of data journalism at The Economist, where said graph originated, and I found myself with a topic that could have been flat in written form. I thought it needed a different kind of emphasis, the sort of emphasis I could provide with my voice. And with that, the Storytelling with Data podcast was born. In that very first episode on the art of feedback, I lent voice to Alex Selby Boothroyd's thoughtful letter, where he outlined how he and his team had reviewed all of the remakes and critiques of their work, and also shed light on the various real-world constraints they faced. To this day, that remains one of my favorite and one of our most listened to episodes. Turns out I'm not the only one for whom this is true. You'll hear more about that and a number of our favorite episodes today as we reflect back over the 100. From that first episode, our primary goal has been the same: to help you communicate more effectively with data. Over time, we've covered quite a lot. From the basics of choosing an effective chart type to talking with experts in various fields and considering what we can learn from them to apply to our own work, to building confidence and influence as a presenter. For this special 100th episode, each member of the Storytelling with Data team picked an all-time favorite episode. As we were compiling these, we realized something interesting, which is that not every episode is right for every person at every moment. As you listen, you might just be getting started and trying to understand the fundamentals. Or maybe you're already comfortable making good graphs but want to tell better stories. Perhaps you're trying to use data to influence decisions. So we asked the team to take a more nuanced approach. What is your favorite episode? And more importantly, when would you recommend it? What emerged were 5 distinct stages you may find yourself in along your data storytelling journey. 1. Learning data storytelling basics. 2. Creating better stories. 3. Thinking strategically. 4. Influencing people and decisions. And 5. Presenting with confidence. For each stage, we'll share 2 of our team's favorite episodes. They'll talk about why it stood out, and then we'll play a short clip so you can hear the moment that made it memorable. And if something resonates, we've gone a step further. We've created full playlists for each stage with even more episodes you can explore. You'll be able to keep learning and go deeper in the area that matters most to you right now. Whether this is your first episode or you've been with us for all 100, you'll love this one because it's organized around different goals and interests, which means it's also an easy one to share. Your colleagues can jump to the section that resonates with them and start improving right away. Let's start with our first stage, Learning Data Storytelling Basics. I'll hand it over to data storyteller Allie Torban to kick us off and share one of her favorite episodes for getting started.
Hey, Allie here. Most of us did not get the chance to take a data storytelling 101 class in college. That would have been fun. It's a pretty new field, and there's not this one well-defined standard path you take if you want to be a data storyteller or even a data viz designer. And I found that really frustrating and difficult when I was trying to pivot into the data viz field in 2018. I was thinking, where do I start? What should I try to learn first? What kind of jobs should I even be looking for? Maybe I should just focus on one tool. They were just endless questions. And that's why I found episode 14, Learning Data Visualization, to be so helpful. In the episode, Cole invites a dozen data viz practitioners to answer the question, how did you learn to visualize data? And they share all their stories on their career progressions and how they learned. And I had this aha moment when I listened to Andy Cotgreave's clip where he talks about the best way to get started in the field is to create, and create. Your work will be embarrassing to you when you're starting to create new charts, but you will get better. And they say that you cannot steer a stationary ship. And Andy makes the point that if you're wondering how to start learning, then just start creating. And you will quickly discover where you need to improve, and it'll help you seek out specific ways to hone your craft. So here is the clip of Andy.
Whenever somebody says, all these people who do Makeover Monday and storytelling with data makeovers, challenges, they're so brilliant. How could I ever be like that? To which the answer is, well, look, once upon a time I wasn't. We all started somewhere. We were all naive users, exploring our way in a new discipline. Now, advice. What piece of advice would I give to someone who is just learning to visualize data or who is interested in improving their skills? If you want to improve your skills in this area or learn to visualize data, then my advice is to go and read Austin Kleon's book, Steal Like an Artist. It's a really short book. It's a great manifesto on how to become a great artist. But his principle is you learn by copying others. And when you copy people honorably, you take their style, and even in the process of copying it, you're actually putting your own style into that, or you're understanding what they did. And this is a great way of learning. Take a look at what other people do, take inspiration and put those into your own work. Eventually, through that, you will discover your own voice and your own style that will evolve over time. That was certainly one of the principles behind the Big Book of Dashboards. We wanted to create a resource of, many case studies, 28 case studies, that people could steal from and take inspiration from in their own work. Now, there's no shortage of opportunities for you to practice these skills. Cole, you do your storytelling with data challenges each month. They are amazing. Andy Kriebel and Eva Murray are still running Makeover Monday. They too are incredible opportunities to play with new data every week, see what others are doing, and even get feedback on your work. So practice, iterate, collaborate, and don't be intimidated by when you see masters at work, because everybody who's accomplished and a leader in the data visualization field started out where you are at some point.
All right, next up, data storyteller Ryan shares his favorite episode when you're in the learning stage.
Hi, Ryan here. As you're getting to know the basics of the skills we teach at Storytelling with Data, it's natural to have questions. And while we would love a list of hard and fast rules to live by, the reality of the world is that we often work in gray areas. Instead, communication tools and critical thinking help us understand our context and point us to the answer of any given question. In episode 4, aptly titled, It Depends, Cole navigates these murky waters with ease, tackling 10 of our most common questions where the answer, depends. Here's my favorite moment.
What should I do when I have missing or incomplete data? How upfront should I be with my audience about that? It depends. And really here, it depends on how critical that missing or incomplete data is to your overall message, right? Do you know enough that generally, directionally, things are still going to be what you're saying? Or are there really important things where you're making an assumption, and if that assumption turns out to be false, it actually changes the outcome of what you're going to be showing? Because I would say in the former case where, okay, maybe your data is not complete, but you have enough of it there and you can say generally what's going on. And even if you get the rest of that data, it's not likely to change the course of what you're recommending or what you're showing. Then I think that can be more footnote sort of material where it's important still to note, but it doesn't need to be the first thing up front that you show your audience. On the other hand, if you're making some assumptions or if knowing this incomplete data could change the outcome of what you're showing or change the thing that you are recommending or pushing for, then you need to be more upfront so that your audience can take this into account as they're interpreting what you're showing. Now, when it comes to how explicitly and where and how we caveat our data, you just want to be thoughtful about this, because over caveating when you don't need to can actually derail the conversation. I can think back to an example where I was at Google and was getting ready to present some data to senior leadership on the cost of attrition. And there were so many assumptions that went into this. How long was a seat vacant? How much did we spend on recruiting activities? What was the value lost over the time of the vacant seat? And when I went in, it ended up being, if you picture a slide, half the slide at the top was taken up with all of these assumptions. And then the graph ended up actually being this sort of tiny thing, almost an afterthought on the bottom of the slide. And the exec who I was presenting to took one look at this and said, you actually don't even need to talk to me today because I don't believe anything you're going to show me when you caveat that much. And it's one of those things thinking back, yeah, I never should have gone in with that anyway. And now whether that means not showing all of your caveats up front or if it means changing the way you talk about it. And these things all have implications on how our audience takes in the data that we're going to show them and how much they believe it or don't believe it.
All right, now we're moving to stage 2 of 5 of data storytelling that we call create. You might be in this stage if you find yourself thinking, hey, I understand the basics of data storytelling, but I need help turning my data into clear, engaging narratives that people actually care about. In this segment, our COO, Randy, and CEO, Cole, share their favorite episodes around creating better data stories. Here's Randy.
Hi, Randy here. So if you're at the stage where you're working on trying to create better stories, trying to turn information into something clear, engaging, and memorable, one episode I'd recommend checking out is episode 21, A Special Conversation With. Now, this episode is especially meaningful to me because it was done back in 2019, and it features our son Avery, who was 6 at the time, interviewing Cole about storytelling with data. Let's practice. There was also a short commercial from our youngest kids, Dorian, who was 5, and Eloise, who was 3. I love hearing their voices from that moment in time, especially now that they've all changed so much. So what makes it work for this stage is that it reminds us how much the human element matters. A book about practicing data storytelling could be introduced in a straightforward way, but Avery's curiosity makes it personal, warm, and most importantly, memorable. The clip I chose comes later in the episode when Avery asks Cole about what advice she would give someone writing a book. Cole will talk about her planning process with Post-its and how to be able to move ideas around, and then Avery connects it to a school writing process, and you'll hear about the sloppy copy. That's such a great metaphor for creating better data stories. They rarely come out perfectly the first time. We have to shape them, test them, revise them, and keep refining until they make sense for someone else. Here's Avery and Cole.
Okay. What advice would you give someone if they were going to write a book? If they were going to write a different topic or something about a book, what advice would you give them?
I think once you have an idea of something you want to write about, then it's often good to do some planning. And so when I plan, I do it in a low-tech way. Do you know what some of my favorite things are?
Post-its?
Yeah. Have you ever seen me in here when I have big pieces of paper and I lay them out on the floor and they have Post-its all over them?
Yeah, like pink, green, and blue.
Yeah, I color code too sometimes. That's me planning. What I do is I take a pile of Post-its and I write down ideas, and then I start moving those around and rearranging and trying to put structure around them. So this is one of the things that helps me get ideas out of my brain, out where I can see them and touch them and move them around. And so that can be a really helpful thing, I think, for anybody who's going to write about any topic. You did a lot of writing last year at school. How would you decide what to write about or how you were going to organize your pages?
We started doing this thing called editing, where our teachers would come with a pen and, like, if we had too much uppercase letters, they would draw on top. And if we needed a space, they would do a squiggly line in the space. And then we call this our final copy, is where we look at the draft, the thing that we used to practice, and we would write like we would look at the thing that we call a sloppy copy, where it's not the real book we do.
Yep.
Where we put it on one side and we look at it and then write on the other side. So then like we spell real books, and then way at the end of writing, we did our first soft covers.
Oh, cool. That editing process takes a lot of time and attention, right? Because that takes a lot of time after someone's made these corrections to then go back and incorporate all of those, right? To get to your final draft, what did you call it?
The sloppy copy.
The sloppy copy, right? To get from the sloppy copy to the final draft. So it's interesting because when I look back at the whole process of writing the book, do you know what piece I think took the most time out of everything? Editing. I edited over the entire course of that year plus that I spent writing. And it wasn't just one sloppy copy to the final draft. It was like many sloppy copies where I was reading through and different people were reading through at different parts and all of them giving me feedback. Then I would decide when and how to make changes. And that took a lot of time. But that time is really important because that's what makes it so that someone else reading the book has a good experience, right? Like you said, the right letters are capitalized or not capitalized, and there's space between words, and things are spelled correctly, and they make sense, and they fit together. So it's a really important part of the writing process, even though it's kind of painful at times.
And I couldn't resist. Here's a bit from that very fun commercial. Super cute.
Hi, my name is Eloise, and you will whip my mommy's boat. And my brother's going to come up. His name is Dorian. Hello, my name is Dorian, and I am 5. I wanted to say hello to you all. My mommy wrote a new book called Let's Practice. You should really check it out. It has over 100 hands-on exercises and lots of cool pictures. I can't wait to read it myself. Pre-order on Amazon today.
Hi, Cole here. First, I have to say how incredible it is to hear the sweet voices of my kids from all those years ago. Now, I want to share another interview episode. This time, I was the one asking the questions. It was a conversation with geographer Kenneth Field about maps. Now, it might surprise you that I'm calling out an episode on maps as part of creating better stories, but there were several points Ken made that have stuck with me and are absolutely relevant for us as we craft data communications. In this clip, you're going to hear about how technology compresses time and both the good and bad that comes with that. As you listen, I encourage you to substitute the mapping tools we talk about with AI. I think you'll find Ken's advice to be just as pertinent when it comes to how we work with those tools today.
For me, it's simply still get a piece of paper and a pen or a pencil and start sketching and start to see how the map evolves as a product of you just churning through the ideas in your mind. What is it you want to show? What is it you want to tell? How do you want to do this? Do you want to do this in a fairly austere manner? Perhaps you're publishing in a statistical textbook, or maybe you want to put your map on the front page of a national newspaper, in which case the same data might need to be imagined in perhaps a more attention-grabbing way, because you want readership. So that's really what I mean by trying to explain to yourself. I won't say I have voices inside my head telling me how to do things, but it's a little bit like that. It's just sitting there in a quiet space and working things out and spending time thinking, and also talking with your friends and colleagues and asking for opinions and bringing a lot of experience together can often help.
And this was one of the things when you and I were chatting in preparation for this that we spent a little bit of time on that I find so interesting. Because you talked a little bit about you went to school to make maps, and then GIS came along and changed everything. Can you talk about how the ease of creating in software has impacted the way that we think about and make maps?
Yeah, like I said, so I graduated in 1991 from my cartography degree, and I'd learned all about, how to use scribe coat and etching tools and dark rooms to do all sorts of stuff with photographic equipment to make maps. And, a map would take me 10 weeks to make. But that 10 weeks was kind of interesting because you had to really deeply think about every mark you put on the map, because if you made a mistake, you might be having to redo 2 weeks worth of work, or you might have just wasted hundreds of dollars worth of, materials in it was expensive to make mistakes. So you kind of became attuned to having to get it right first time, but you had a nice amount of time in which to do that. Now, these days, technology has compressed that time to basically nothing. I can make the same map now in about 5 minutes than it used to take me 10 weeks to make. And that's
Which
brilliant.
Sounds like an amazing thing, right?
It is, but it is great, right? It's fantastic. But there is a slight downside to it. It's much easier. There's more data available. It's quicker to make every mark on a map, but those marks still require thought and application. So that's where I kind of see, teaching about this as being vital, because the more you can kind of understand a little bit about the map making or the map design process, the quicker you can overcome that problem of compression of time, because you'll come to a better decision more quickly. And, if you make a mistake now, it's not really a problem either, I guess, because you can easily fix it. But do you fix it is the question. Do you accept that the software is just giving you the map, or do you sit there and look at it a little bit critically and say, I'm not sure that actually does the job? And as I said, the great thing is the technology means that you can fix it very quickly. If you're aware of what you've done is perhaps suboptimal.
Remember when we told everyone to pre-order Mom's book?
I barely remember what I had for breakfast. I was 3. I definitely don't remember.
Well, we're back.
This time, we're not talking about a book. We're talking about workshops.
If your team struggles with confusing charts,
presentations nobody understands, or data that doesn't lead to action,
the Storytelling with Data team teaches practical workshops that help people communicate more clearly.
Some are just 2 hours. Some are half-day workshops.
And some are immersive full-day experiences.
Whether your team is new to data storytelling or looking to level up their communication skills, there's a workshop designed to help.
Visit
storytellingwithdata.com
and click Book a Workshop to learn more.
That's storytellingwithdata.com and click Book a Workshop to learn more.
Hey, Allie here again. Now we're moving to the third stage of data storytelling called strategize. You might be in this stage if you find yourself thinking, I need to think beyond charts and stories, and I need to make smarter decisions about what to show, why it matters, and how it drives impact. In this segment, we'll hear from data storyteller Amy and our client experience manager Jody with their favorite episodes around strategizing.
Hi, Amy here. One of my favorite podcast episodes for putting the storytelling with data lessons into practice is episode number 5, The Beauty of Constraints. And I love this one because it reframes challenges as opportunities and offers some really smart ways to work within the common limitations we face at work. Things like time, tools, space restrictions. It's especially helpful once you know the basic storytelling with data lessons, because the next challenge often becomes how to make good choices under real-world constraints. And in this episode, there's a moment when Cole talks about having limited time to create content, something we all face in our day-to-day. And she offers 2 really practical tips that are pretty quick to implement, yet really impactful when communicating with data.
There's also the conundrum, though, of the time we have to actually create content, right? To visualize our data and to put that into slides or reports. Now, it's always been interesting to me because the typical process when we're communicating with data, typically you start off with a hypothesis or a question. Then you gather the data, you clean the data, you analyze the data. And at that point, we'll often put it in a graph, maybe outline some findings, and we stop there. When that graph is actually the only part of the entire process, right? All the behind the scenes stuff that our audience ever sees. And yet too often we get to that point and we find ourselves with no time left to do anything, no time left to iterate or make sure that the piece that our audience does see says good things about the stuff that's happening behind the scenes. My point of view is we should spend at least as much time and effort on the visualizing and communicating piece of the analytical process as we do to all the stuff behind the scenes. But that said, time constraints often come up here. And typically, the lowest hanging fruit in organizations that I encounter when it comes to the things that you can do that will have the maximum amount of impact for the least amount of effort or time are 2 things: use of color and use of words. So first, color used sparingly to draw your audience's attention to where you want them to look. And secondly, words, either in your spoken narrative or written physically on the page or the slide, to tell your audience why you want them to look there. Those 2 things alone can go a tremendous way in terms of taking something that might otherwise been confusing or complicated and helping make it clear for your audience. So in a time-constrained environment, when it comes to the materials you're preparing, think about being strategic in your use of color and words.
Hi, Jody here. One of my favorite episodes at this stage is episode 83, Reflect and Refine. Use Statio to improve your analysis, graphs, and slides. This one really stood out to me because the idea of pausing to reflect before taking the next step feels so relevant to effective data storytelling and communication. There's a moment in the episode where Cole talks about using intentional pauses throughout the data storytelling process, from asking better questions at the start of a project to refining slides before a presentation. And I think it's especially powerful because those small moments of reflection can completely change the clarity and impact of the work we create.
Imagine this scenario. Your manager has called you into their office to talk through a new analysis that you'll be undertaking. They lay out the objectives, the stakeholders, and the timelines. Here is where the first statio could occur, before you even leave the room. Take a moment to ask a thoughtful question. For example, what's the problem we're trying to solve with this analysis? Do you have a guess or assumption about how things will pan out? What happens if that isn't the case? Who will use the insights? What decisions will they inform? What does success look like for this project? The clarification you can get through raising thoughtful questions like this and talking through them can save you a significant amount of time and effort later on.
I hope you enjoyed those clips around strategizing. Now we're moving to the 4th stage called influence. You might be in this stage if you find yourself thinking things like, I need my work to drive action, change minds, and make an impact with my stakeholders. So in this segment, you'll hear from data storyteller Alex and again, our CEO Cole with their favorite episodes around influencing.
Hi, Alex here. My favorite episode for this stage is the very first one, The Art of Feedback. This also happens to be episode 42. It was such an important conversation that we published it twice. To influence someone, your data story has to be legible, and that requires feedback. Unfortunately, feedback is something that many people struggle with, whether giving a balanced and actionable critique or openly receiving one. But it's absolutely critical in the data storytelling space, because what makes sense to you as the creator of a graph will be completely different to somebody else. To be successful, you need to become highly sensitive to how other people interpret information. And the only way to do that is to force yourself to see your work through other people's eyes. Ask for feedback and be open and humble enough to incorporate those notes. There's a moment in this episode where Cole reads a letter from Alex Selby Boothroyd, the head of data journalism at The Economist. He's responding to a very public critique of his team's work on the Storytelling with Data site.
So Alex Selby Boothroyd, who is head of data journalism at The Economist, wrote me, "Dear Cole, thank you for organizing your fascinating How You Would Visualize Hurricanes challenge. Here in The Economist Data Journalism Department, we've pored over every entry with the same degree of interest and healthy debate that our original chart seems to have provoked. As with all data visualizations, we had to make some compromises. The incomplete final decade was, as many people noted, unsatisfactory. Instead of leaving it to our readers to correct for the shorter time period, in hindsight, we could have used 5-year groupings like Robert did, or 15-year clusters like Todd did to maintain consistent spacing on the x-axis. We could, of course, have improved other elements as well. With more time, we could have incorporated every 2017 hurricane up to and including Hurricane Irma, while accounting for the fact that this year's season is not yet over. As Sharon noted, we could have considered hurricane damage too, or looked instead at accumulated cyclone energy. That said, these data cover all Atlantic storms, and we wanted to focus just on those that made landfall in the United States, as our article was pegged to Irma hitting Florida the previous day. As a description of what has occurred in the past, we thought that the headline and subheadline on the story, "Hurricanes in America have become less frequent, but the most damaging storms now appear to be slightly more common," was accurate. And we felt that the trend lines helped show this. But it's interesting to note that for every visualizer who used trend lines to reach a similar conclusion, there was another who loudly dismissed them as misleading, or was equally vocal about something else we had done wrong. It is heartening to be part of a data visualization community that has such a strong voice. All the best, and do let me know if we can be involved in any future challenges.
Anytime I find myself becoming defensive during a critique, or I worry about being mean when I give feedback, I come back to this episode. I remember that a good critique is about making the work better. It's not personal. It's a normal and respected part of any design process that we should all value, no matter how experienced we become.
Hi, Cole here one more time. When it comes to influence, I want to point to one of the best pieces of advice I've ever received in my career. 2 simple words that totally changed both how I feel and how I'm perceived. Actually, it might intrigue you to know that I am applying this technique right now. I share the story around this in episode 73. You'll hear a clip from that momentarily. Listening back just now reminded me of another benefit, which is the level of control you get over a room when you do this. In the full episode, you'll also hear about how you can use this practice to boost your creativity and keep things concise. But first, let's hear how a straightforward tip can totally change your influence when presenting.
One of the facilitators of that program sat in one of my classes, observed me, and offered feedback. I can still remember the setting. It was your typical conference room setup. Large rectangular table in the middle. I was seated on one end of the table with my laptop in front of me, which I was using to drive the slides. The slides were projected on a screen on the opposite end of the table. And there were about a dozen or so people seated on either side. I went through my training, felt like I was doing a pretty good job. and we get done. And Neve was the facilitator who was there offering feedback. And she turned to me and she said, "That was great, but I feel a bit like I've been watching a tennis match because I knew my attention needed to be on the slides. You were showing things that I needed to pay attention to. But you at the other end of that table were so animated that I couldn't help but look at you." And what this created was tension, where the entire time she's going back and forth and back and forth. And what Neve said to me, 2 simple words: stand up, move to the front of the room. And those 2 simple words forever changed the way I present. If I think of the career advice I have received over time, I think those 2 words had both the biggest immediate and lasting impact, because a couple of things happened when I did that. So first off, when I was standing up with my slides, it meant no longer were we working against each other. We weren't competing for attention or clashing. Rather, we were working in coordination, in concert. Second, and this is something I in no way anticipated, but there was something about just the physical motion of standing up that allowed me to take on a different persona, where no longer was I introvert Cole behind my laptop. Standing up, I was now the persona of presenting Cole. And I was able to project this confidence that I eventually, through time and practice, grew into and believed.
We have one last segment. This is the 5th stage of data storytelling, called present. You might be in this stage if you find yourself thinking, I need to communicate my work clearly and confidently so people understand, remember, and act on it. So in this segment, we'll hear from data storyteller Simon and our education and outreach specialist Caitlin with their favorite episodes around presenting. Here's Simon.
Hi there, Simon here, and I've long believed that strong communication and presentation skills are undervalued for those of us that work with data. And as a result, one of my favourite podcast episodes is episode 6, called Say It Out Loud. Now, practicing out loud is a fantastic way to prepare. Not only does it help you commit your progression to memory, but it also forces you to think about the transitions between slides. These transitions are crucial, and done well can really help achieve a smooth flow between the slides and your content. Another benefit of practicing out loud is that you get to talk through your graphs, and as you do so, you may identify opportunities on how you can revise those visuals, change elements and formatting aspects to better align to the talking points you are going to make. Finally, practicing out loud helps boost your confidence, something that perhaps doesn't come naturally to those of us who are presenting in front of people. The better you feel prepared, the better then you can go into that room and deliver your content confidently and ensure that you are present in the room, really transforming the experience for your audience. But practicing out loud isn't solely reserved for just preparing for that final delivery. It can be very useful when planning and creating your content as well, as Cole describes in this excerpt.
When it comes to our full presentation, saying it out loud can be helpful both as part of the planning process as well as part of the practicing process. So when it comes to planning, one of my big recommendations is put your slides aside and think about how would you talk through what you need to say with someone else, and actually do this out loud, where you figure out what context do you start with. Where is something awry? Where is there tension in this? Why should the person you're talking with care? Where does data come in? What data comes in? How do you talk about it? What do you need your audience to actually do? When you hear yourself say these things out loud, and it can be an abbreviated version. Think about if you had 3 minutes to tell your audience what you needed to tell them, what would you say? can be useful for getting insight into how we might then, going back to our slides, how we might structure that presentation in a way that's going to make sense to somebody else. So there's something about when we talk out loud that it forces us to connect thoughts to each other in a way that we just don't do when we are working piecemeal, which PowerPoint or slideware, that often ends up what's happening, where we're focusing on a single slide at a time. So each slide might be really effective, but if that's a disjointed experience going from one to the next, that can be non-ideal for the audience. So there's something about talking through the story at a high level out loud that if we can get succinct there and then turn back to our materials, that can sometimes highlight paths to take people through, or it might highlight things that are missing that you need to connect one idea or one topic to the next. So great way of informing order and informing the content that needs to actually be in your slide deck by talking through it out loud as part of the planning process.
Hi, Caitlin here. One of my favorite episodes in the Presenting with Confidence stage is episode 86, Speak So Others Listen. I love this episode because the way you present your data has just as much impact as the way you visualize it. Even the most beautiful slides and graphs will be forgotten when the person presenting them isn't communicating with confidence and clarity. Developing and facilitating engaging presentations has been a passion of mine throughout my career, and Cole has several simple and highly effective tips for sharpening your communication skills that has made me an even better presenter. My favorite part of the episode is when Cole talks about the impact of posture on how your voice sounds. She asks the audience to assume poor posture and try introducing themselves. Then she instructs them to lift their head, relax their shoulders, stand tall, and introduce themselves again, and notice the difference in how they sound. It's such a small physical shift, but it completely changes how your audience receives you. Mastering your communication skills is vital to becoming a stellar data storyteller. And this episode reminds us that it's worth putting just as much time, or even more, into honing your presentation skills as you do into creating good graphs.
I did an exercise with the high school students a couple weeks ago to demonstrate how voice follows body. I had them stand up and first assume poor posture. Head down, shoulders slump forward, slouch, and introduce yourself in a sentence. I'll actually do this now, assuming that same poor posture. Hi, my name's Cole, and I tell stories with data. Next, stand up straight, shoulders back, head held high, smile. My name is Cole, and I tell stories with data. Not only do I sound different, I feel different when I do these things. I invite you now to pause and try this out yourself. Discomfort is contagious. If your audience senses that you are uneasy, they're likely to feel uneasy as well. On the other hand, if we project confidence, it can positively impact others' confidence in us. This is a space where we can actually trick ourselves in really useful ways. You've probably heard the phrase, fake it until you make it. When it comes to confidence, exuding a commanding presence, this totally works. Meaning, act confident by positioning your body as if you are, and you'll actually start to feel it too. With the high schoolers, we started to feel this out with the exercise that I described a moment ago. We also talked about power poses and practiced them. It sounds super silly. It feels super silly. We were laughing a lot, but it really does help. I've been known to do this before a big conference presentation where I'll go into a bathroom stall and stand like a superhero. Arms on my hips, chest pumped out. One practical thing this does is just open your airway so you can breathe full breaths, which, as we've talked about, is important. Going back to that early anecdote of my nervousness presenting at the bank, My shaking voice was because I wasn't breathing deeply enough. That can easily turn into a downward spiral. When you're nervous, you don't breathe deeply, then you hear your voice shaking and it makes you more nervous and everything gets worse. You can break that cycle by pausing, taking a deep breath, and restarting. Again, this idea of projecting confidence, even if you don't feel it, positioning your body can get you out of your head in useful ways.
Thanks for joining us today. I hope this was helpful. If there was a stage that you want to dive deeper into, we actually created a 10-episode playlist for each of the stages. You can click over to the show notes and start listening now. And maybe you have a friend who's just starting to learn, create, strategize, influence, or present data stories who would love this episode too. Please feel free to share. Also, maybe this is the year that you'd like to dedicate more time to developing your data storytelling skills. If so, you can join the next cohort of our 8-week virtual course that's open to the public. You'll learn a repeatable process to create clear data stories that capture attention, build understanding, and drive action. The next cohort starts September 2026, and we also run cohorts a few times a year, so if you can't make that one, be sure to join our newsletter to make sure you hear about the next one. Oh, and don't forget to use the code PODCAST10 for 10% off the course. Okay, bye for now.